Colleagues, it's time for us to start our meeting, and we've also formed a quorum. This is the meeting of the Subcommittee on Air Pollution Control Marine Light Diesel Regulation. This is our first meeting. Let's proceed with election of chairman. In accordance with the House rules in relation to election of chairman, the member who has we need nominations from members and at least 1 seconder for the nominee. Any nominations? Ms. Sito? Any seconder? I have to ask myself whether I accept the nomination. Yes, I can accept the nomination. Any other nominations? Well, we can be quick then. We don't need to swap seats. I declare Ms. Sitho elected chairman of this subcommittee. All right, we'll be quick. Please invite the officials to come in. I'd first of all like to ask the clerk to take us through the meeting arrangements of this subcommittee. The scrutiny period of this piece of subsidiary legislation should be the 19th of February, if not extended. Upon extension, that can be extended to the 19th of March. Madam Chairman, I believe we need an extension. And soonest, at the council meeting next Wednesday, you can move a motion to extend the scrutiny period to the 19th of March, because latest by the 7th of March we need to submit a report to the House Committee. Next Wednesday, before the motion debate on the policy address, yes, it's not a short piece of legislation. We need to go through clause by clause scrutiny. Members, do we need to invite the industry members to come for a public hearing? Because I recall that at the relevant panel meetings, members had quite some comments. Mr. Stephen Ho, Madam Chairman, I believe we should first invite the industry to submit written comments first. That's more appropriate. All right, industry, particularly those from the business sector, those with vessels. Well, I don't have any vessels. I don't have any money either. Madam Chairman, when we moved that a subcommittee be established, we already invited the industry to come and express their views. So probably it's more appropriate to invite them for written comments first. Well, Mr. Stephen Ho, you represent the fishing industry. But apart from the fishing industry, we'll have other sectors of the community involved. So we'll wait till all members have arrived before we ask again. We have to be fair. I don't want to rush through this issue in the first few minutes. Let's introduce the attending officials. Well, once again is Mr. Lai, Deputy Director of Environmental Protection, Mr. Andrew Lai. Again, Mr. Mok Wai Chun, responsible for air policy, Assistant Director of Environmental Protection. Then Mr. Tony Lee, Senior Environmental Protection Officer for Air Policy. And then from the DOJ, we have Mr. Peter Z. Well, these are all familiar faces. I'll introduce them one by one today, but I won't do this again next time. Mr. Lai, can you take us through the details and background of this piece of subsidiary legislation? Thank you, Madam Chairman. Let me first wish all members every success in the Year of the Horse. Please assist us in the scrutiny of this regulation. We have members who are not on the panel, so allow me to explain the background of the regulation to members. In fact, for this regulation, it originated from the Air Pollution Control Ordinance, CAP 43. Or 311, would like to reduce air pollution. As for the proposals, in March 2013, in the Environmental Affairs Panel, we already introduced the legislation to members once, with member support. And then in July last year, there was a public hearing with members of the industry expressing their views. After referring to the views of the industry, we drafted the regulation together with the DOJ colleagues. I'd like to introduce this regulation in 3 areas. First of all, we need to handle vessel fuels. Secondly, the composition of the regulation, and then the concerns of the industry. First of all, the main purpose of the regulation is to improve Hong Kong's air quality. I believe colleagues or members all understand that we have 3 polluting sources: the power plants, vehicles, and vessels. If you look at the list of emission for carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and RSPs, vessels are already the major source of emission. So to improve air quality, apart from handling power plants and vehicles, vessels will be one of our major objectives. As for vessel fuels, in fact, in Hong Kong, the diesel used by vessels or other fuels used by vessels are basically not regulated by law. That's different from vehicles. You're more familiar with vehicles. For vehicles, we're already using Euro 5 fuels. In other words, the amount of pollutants has been reduced. That's conducive to better air quality. To enhance the quality of vessel fuels, the sulfur content has to be greatly reduced. Allow me to briefly explain that in Hong Kong, we need to handle 3 types of vessels. First of all, ocean-going vessels, OGVs, container vessels coming from all over the world, and then local vessels like ferries and river trade vessels, and then the pleasure boats. We have a clear concept on the regulation of local vessels in particular. For the pleasure boats, they have to use the highest quality petrol. So the quality is the highest with the least pollution. And then secondly, we have to handle the OGVs, the container vessels, for example. We're now drafting a piece of legislation on container vessels in the hope that starting from next year, when OGVs arrive in Hong Kong, they have to switch to low sulfur diesel, because the emission can be as high as 3.5% insofar as content is concerned. So to reduce the pollution resulting from OGVs, we propose that when OGVs berth, they have to switch to low sulfur diesel with a sulfur content not exceeding 0.5%. We'll introduce that legislation to the Council later. And this regulation is to regulate local vessels, covering ferries, river vessels, and fishing vessels. Under this regulation, or under the present laws, the fuel quality of these vessels are not regulated. By way of this regulation, we'd like to lower the sulfur content of the fuel used. That is to reduce it from 0.5% by 90% to 0.05%. So 90% less. As for this regulation, I would like members to understand that we aim at the supply of fuel, not the use of fuel by individual vessels. We understand that vessels are from all over the world. They may fill their fuel in Guangdong province or in Southeast Asia. So, if any vessel purchases fuel in Hong Kong, for the suppliers and oil companies, they have to supply diesel that satisfies our specifications. And this is to be done by way of legislation. How are we going to enforce this new regulation? Well, this time we target the fuel quality provided by oil companies, the suppliers. So for the oil companies or fuel suppliers, in future, for every batch of fuel, there must be a test report to prove that the fuel quality satisfies the statutory requirements. Besides, the test reports and invoices and bills have to be kept for 3 years, such that in future, if necessary, we can follow up with these oil companies. If we discover that any oil company or supplier of vessel fuel sell substandard fuel, that will constitute an offense. And under the regulation, the offender can be fined or even imprisoned. Of course, if any oil company fails to keep reports on fuel quality as required, that will also constitute an offense, and the offender is subject to punishment. This regulation is to implement our fuel quality standards and to make sure that oil companies locally supply fuel up to a certain standard, and the diesel supplied satisfies our requirements so as to reduce air pollution. When drafting the regulation, we consulted different trades and industries, particularly the fishing industry, the ferries, and local logistics companies. They're more concerned about two aspects. First of all, for the better quality fuel, will they be more expensive? For the old-style fishing vessels and ferries, can their engines suit the new fuel? To address these concerns, together with the industry, we've set up a task force and we've brought in help from the Hong Kong U. For the old-style vessels, they're put on a device which will test the new fuel to see whether there is any adverse effect or incompatibility. The results were in the positive. We'll inform the industry members of the test results so that their minds can be set at ease. And there are a number of concerns about the lifting of the standard from 0.5% to 0.05% and the extra costs incurred. Fortunately, in Asia, for the demand of low sulfur diesel, the demand is rising. So the quality fuel, when compared with the existing fuel in the market, the cost difference will only be 1%, that is 7 cents. In the past year is $6 to $7 per liter. For a price difference of less than 10 cents, we believe that to the industry that should be affordable. And we've already got information from the oil companies that given the rising demand for low sulfur diesel, the operational costs can be further reduced and the price difference can be further reduced as well. And we hope that the regulation can take effect from the 1st of April this year, such that all oil companies will have to sell the quality diesel with a sulfur content of lower than 0.05%. In fact, last year, the oil companies have already introduced such fuel into Hong Kong. The price was as expected. The price difference was around 1% only. Up to the fourth quarter of last year, the low sulfur diesel has taken up 1/5 of the market supply. That is 1/5 of the fuel used was quality fuel. So for the industry and the fishing industry, their members are already using these quality fuel, and the vessels have not experienced any problems. Otherwise, we would have received complaints.
Therefore, The main concern of the industry is the price and also technical feasibility. We believe those problems can be satisfactorily resolved. I think I should end my introduction here, and I will be happy to take members' questions. And together with DOJ, we'll be happy to take questions. Thank you. This regulation is not too short. Let me now take up our meeting schedule with you first. The clerk has proposed the 15th of February, 9 o'clock in the morning, a Saturday. Maybe it's not a very good time. If not, then the 18th of February, a Tuesday, 10:45, and then February 24th, a Monday at 8:30 a.m. I can't make it on the 15th. I can make it on the 15th and the 24th. On the 24th is 8:30 in the morning. What about the 18th? It's also in the morning. The 15th, who can't make it except Mr. Frankie Yek? No then. We can't even form a quorum. So let us have the 18th and the 24th fixed first. The 18th, what time? 10:45 a.m. And then the 24th, February, 8:30 a.m. If you are very well versed with the regulation, if the administration has already done all the consultation with you beforehand, then I think 3 meetings in all should be okay, but it depends whether they have done a good job. Now the floor is open to questions. Sorry, on the 18th I have to take leave. Do we have a quorum? Okay then, fine. We can't accommodate everybody. Just now the clerk told me that the 7th of March is the deadline for giving a report to the House, and the 19th of March is the date when we have to return to Council. After the 24th of February, if things are still in a rush and we need more meetings, we should still be able to have 1 or 2 meetings. Chairman, I think 2 meetings would be quite okay. 2 meetings would be all right. Let me respond a little. Actually, I have asked around the industries. They have been here and they have made no other demands. So I believe time is in our hands. Great. The 2 members from the industries have spoken and we have heard you. Just now, Mr. Stephen Ho said that we should invite written submissions. Mr. Frankie Yik, we will also talk to the industries you are in contact with and those who have been here before in public hearings. Let us write to them to see whether they would like to write in, and if they do, we will circulate them to members. Okay, now it's the time for members to ask questions, please. Any questions? Mr. Stephen Ho. Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to state at the beginning that the industry cares a lot about air quality. They are on the vessels. They may have emissions from the vessels, but then they are also the recipients of those emissions. Let me ask 2 questions. One, it is a long-standing problem. It is not because of this regulation, but we are talking about the regulation of oil companies or suppliers. You have done a lot, and you are saying that if all fuel products in Hong Kong are going to be low in sulfur content, then theoretically oil companies will have no excuse to say that there will be an increase in administrative cost. In other words, the price differential will only be 7 cents. However, we cannot guarantee that some oil companies may be unscrupulous and they may engage in price variations that are not exactly to be condoned. And how can you regulate that? Sometimes in the past it is said that after you have made the legislation and then they are asked to take out third-party insurance, and then in the first year it was not expensive. However, prices soared in the second and third years and they were very concerned. Now, from the paper and also your statistics, it is said that a quarter of the fuel being used, and last time you said 23%, but this time around you say 20%. So it's about a quarter, let's say, that local people are already using that kind of fuel. And if I may go to the justifications part of your paper, you have not concentrated on environmental protection. Well, yes, that's one of the justifications. But even without the regulation, in Hong Kong, people are gradually moving towards that kind of diesel. I think you have to explain a little more here to make your justifications stronger. Thank you. Mr. Lai, I will take up the last question first. From the angle of the EPD, improving air quality by enhancing the quality of fuel, that is our main purpose. In the last year, until the fourth quarter of last year, over 20% of MLD was already of a low sulfur content. The main reason was not that this was done on the initiative of the oil companies, but rather they knew, they got wind of this regulation that this would come to LegCo and it might be implemented on the 1st of April. So from the middle of last year, oil companies were moving in that direction because they knew there was going to be this new piece of legislation. So the quality fuel, so to speak, the LSD was introduced into Hong Kong. So this had something to do with the regulation here. And I think at this moment, it should not just be a quarter or 1/5. I believe they are getting prepared for the 1st of April. In other words, less than 2 months away, all the fuel products they sell should be LSD, or else they will be breaking the law. Therefore, the use of LSD is going to rise. Second question, the price. Hong Kong has a market economy, and we do not regulate oil prices. But as Mr. Ho analyzed, we had already told oil companies many times that with regard to MLD, we only have one standard, and that is we only want them to sell one product, not 2 or 3 different products. If they sell different products, the handling cost will be more expensive. At least they need different tanks. But if they only have one particular product, then it would be no different from the past, and it will be easy for their operation. Moreover, to monitor oil prices and to enhance transparency of oil price variation, starting from this year, through the Legislative Council website, we are going to publish the free-on-board fuel prices of Singapore. We are going to announce the monthly free-on-board price, and everybody would be clear. Now, if there is a sudden increase or decrease in price, and if people can check the Singaporean FOB, and they would know whether it is anything to do with the import price of the fuel. So we would all be in the position to check the price variations. Why, I just think that we are quite incompetent in regulating the oil companies. Dr. Lo Wai Kwok. Thank you, Chairman. We are scrutinizing this marine light diesel regulation. But I'd like to ask about heavy oil. It is said that at present, OGVs are using heavy oil with a sulfur content that should not exceed 3.5%. In other words, the sulfur content is still quite high. OGVs come to Hong Kong unless they use onshore electricity, or else the generators would still have to use electricity for the vessel operation, and Hong Kong air quality would still be affected. Of course, we have to be mindful of international standards. Now, I'd like to take the opportunity to understand what will happen to the OGVs. Will there be a tightening up of the sulfur content of the heavy oil they use? And also, you explained quite clearly that you are going to control the sellers. But if vessels should have already purchased high diesel content oil when they come into Hong Kong, as I was saying, even if a small vessel, they still have to operate the engine or generator, and there will still be emissions. And in the process, they are not buying oil in Hong Kong, so it is not going to help Hong Kong's air quality. Can you explain these two aspects, Mr. Lam? Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Dr. Low, for your questions. According to the IMO regulations, the heavy oil sulfur content should not exceed 3.5%. This is the standard that is used by the entire world, and it is set by the IMO. And it is hoped that by 2020, the heavy oil sulfur content can be lowered from 3.5% to 1%. That is the long-term goal of the IMO. But as Dr. Low was saying, actually 3.5% sulfur content is an extremely high figure. It is very bad for air quality indeed. Therefore, there is also this requirement that starting from next year, and also it's going to be done by way of legislation, that when OGVs come to Hong Kong, when they are berthed at a container port or at a buoy for unloading the goods, they have to switch to LSD. And the sulfur content should not exceed 0.5%. There will be this piece of regulation coming to LegCo for scrutiny, and hopefully we can have a standard which is more stringent by that imposed by the IMO. So when OGVs come to Hong Kong to unload their freight, the emissions from them would be reduced. This is our goal. On the other hand, this regulation here will also have an impact on OGVs. This regulation before you, it's going to regulate the sulfur content of fuel to be supplied by oil companies, that it should go down from 0.5% to 0.05%. So we are regulating the suppliers, not the purchasers, and there will just be one product. In other words, starting from the 1st of April this year, local oil companies, when they sell to launchers, container vessels, and yachts and other things, they should not sell oil with a sulfur content of higher than 0.05%. So even OGVs have to replenish their tank in Hong Kong. They will also only get this single product that is on sale in Hong Kong. In other words, that will also help to lower the pollution in Hong Kong. Can I please follow up? You mentioned OGVs and the heavy oil they use. Heavy oil and light diesel oil are two different things. And you said that there will be a regulation later to stipulate that when OGVs are berthed in Hong Kong for operation, they have to switch to LSD supplied in Hong Kong. In other words, heavy oil with a low diesel content. No. We are going to make use of a new piece of legislation to require OGVs, including container vessels, when they are berthed in Hong Kong, they have to switch to LSD. And the LSD standard is that the sulfur content should not exceed 0.5%. As for the supplier, well, they can get it from Hong Kong, or there should be 2 oil tanks on the ship. In fact, usually OGVs have 2 tanks. When they go to Europe or North America, there are many ports there where there is a requirement to switch fuel when they have been berthed. Well, okay, that I understand. In other words, later on, when heavy oil is supplied, there will also be a heavy oil product with a low sulfur content, and you are still going to abide by the spirit of this present regulation. In other words, we are also going to supply heavy oil with a low sulfur content. Is that right?
Are you talking about this piece of legislation? Yes. My understanding is that in future there will be no other fuel in Hong Kong's market. If you want to buy any fuel, it will be 0.05%. When vessels come into Hong Kong, they can bring in their oil tank with a fuel with a sulfur content not exceeding 0.05%. Let me explain. For fuel used by vessels, basically there are two types at the moment. One is heavy oil with a high sulfur content. Another type is light diesel oil. In the local market, both are sold. For the heavy diesel, we won't regulate it under this regulation, so the vendors of the heavy diesel can continue to sell it. We're talking about light diesel oil under this regulation. At the moment, the sulfur content limit is 0.5%. Upon the implementation of the regulation, the limit will be 0.05%. in terms of sulfur content. Well, I'm not talking about this regulation. I'm concerned about the next step. That is the heavy fuel used by the OGVs. So you're telling us that in future, the regulatory regime is that in future, when vessels berth in Hong Kong, they have to switch to low sulfur diesel. Well, they may have their own oil tanks. But then in Hong Kong, if they want to fill their tanks, they can do so because low sulfur diesel will be supplied in Hong Kong. Well, let me explain the next step. The next step is that when OGVs berth in Hong Kong, they have to use low sulfur fuel. If they use heavy oil, we don't want them to be in Hong Kong. So there are two solutions. First, they can purchase low sulfur light diesel in Hong Kong. Upon the implementation of the regulation, these vessels will have to buy low sulfur fuel. Another choice is that, in particular for OGVs, when they berth, they will purchase fuel. In general, OGVs entering Hong Kong can easily get low sulfur fuel with a sulfur content not exceeding 0.05% in future. So the next step is that when these OGVs berth in Hong Kong, at present, the sulfur limit is 0.5%, so such vessels can buy low sulfur diesel in Hong Kong, or they can purchase higher quality, low sulfur content fuel elsewhere in the world. So in Hong Kong, will heavy oil still be sold in Hong Kong? Yes. So what about the heavy oil sold in Hong Kong? Will you set the limit at 0.5%? No. There are two types of vessel fuel. One is heavy oil. Now, what is heavy oil? Normally, when a vessel is in international waters, is more inclined to use heavy oil. But as the awareness of environmental protection rises throughout the whole world, in Europe and America, for example, when such vessels berth in a port, they will switch to low sulfur fuel. So in Hong Kong, this is light diesel oil, which will be supplied in Hong Kong's market. So for OGVs coming to Hong Kong, they won't have any problems because of shortage of fuel. So for the heavy oil to be sold in Hong Kong in future, will you also set a limit to the sulfur content? For heavy oil, we'll have to follow the IMO's practice. For the IMO, its ceiling is still 3.5% insofar as sulfur content is concerned. As Mr. Lai explained, by 2020, IMO would like to lower the sulfur content of vessel fuel to 0.5%. But IMO made it very clear then that feasibility might be a problem, so they would conduct a review in 2018. If the result of that review reveals that it's feasible to do so, then they will adopt a new standard. Otherwise, they will postpone the new standard. So the 2018 review will be important. Once IMO has made a decision, we'll follow suit. the regulation of heavy oil will have to follow the decision of the IMO. In other words, in Hong Kong, heavy oil will still be sold, even if the sulfur content is as high as 3.5%. But that's the ceiling. So how do you know whether a certain vessel is using heavy oil in Hong Kong or not? For heavy oil, all ports follow the regulatory standards of IMO insofar as heavy oil is concerned. In future, if we require OGVs to switch fuel when they berth, how do we know whether or not they have switched fuel? We can let you have the details in future, but I can explain a little bit now. You're talking about the chart? No. Well, normally we have a number of options. Number one, the IMO requires all vessel owners or engineers to keep a logbook with all the details written in it. Why? Because in future, if anything is to happen and insurance is to be paid, then that logbook will be the Bible. And we may even need oil samples to be inspected. We're still examining whether or not we can have a remote control device to test whether a vessel has switched fuel. Because there's a huge difference between 3.5% and 0.5%. So we're trying to see whether there's such a device. Then we don't need really to board the vessel to carry out inspection. So in future, we'll give members more details. Mr. Frankie Yik. Thank you, Madam Chairman. First of all, Mr. Lai is very clever. He repeatedly mentioned quality fuel, quality fuel, quality fuel. But low sulfur diesel may not be quality fuel. Mr. Stephen Ho mentioned price, which is our concern. We'll have to declare that I'm a director of the Star Ferry. We're one of the stakeholders. We checked the prices. Now, when the whole of Hong Kong has switched to the new fuel, then the oil companies can manipulate the prices. That's our worry. Well, just now you said that it's very good. They have to announce every month the Singaporean FOB price. Well, now we know the ratio, the percentage. Can you help us? Because the industry has no ability to request the oil companies to reduce prices. And then under the law at present, there's no regulatory regime. I share the views of Mr. Ho. So if they do not abide by the rules and regulations and continue to increase fuel prices, what will you do? The industry is very concerned. And then we're also very concerned about fuel switch by OGVs. The industry is very worried. Why? You should, as soon as possible, work out a common pace with the Pearl River Delta. Vessels won't switch automatically to low sulfur diesel. So you have to guard against unfair competition. Now, Madam Chairman, half of our containers are now transshipment cargoes, which don't need to come to Hong Kong. So if we're expensive, they may go to the mainland, where they don't need to switch fuel. So that the department should act expeditiously. Last time I heard that you're discussing with the mainland side. Within a year, you should implement another piece of legislation. Let me give you some tips. The CTU has invented a remote detect device, which is very good. You should contact Professor Liu. You don't need to board the vessel to check. Mr. Lai, I'd like to thank Mr. Yik for the fuel switch requirement by OGVs. We agree to Mr. Yik's analysis and concerns. Yes, the prices are more market to the industry. Well, fortunately, in this exercise, the price difference won't be too huge. But for OGVs, the price differences are rather huge, thus adding to the costs of vessel companies. We're already discussing with the port authorities of Shenzhen and Guangdong province to see whether we can altogether implement the fuel switch requirement when OGVs berth. So we would like to be at the same pace. And then we would like to produce a high environmental protection effect. We don't just want Victoria Harbour to become cleaner. We want Yantian, for example, to be clean as well. So communication is being done with the mainland authorities. As for prices, we all know that at the moment, for fuel products, oil companies are adopting market prices. We would like to have transparency for the price structure. Starting from this year, every month, vessel fuel will take reference from the FOB Singapore specifications, which are uploaded to our website every month so that we all know the monthly fluctuations. If the local prices fluctuate more than the export prices of Singapore, then we need to ask the oil companies what the reasons are. In regulating the operation of oil companies, that will be helpful. As for whether or not there will be price rigging on the part of oil companies, well, this is conspiracy theory. I mean, if they want to do so, they can do it even now. They now rely on the fuel from Singapore with prices fixed locally. In the past 1 odd years, be it the 0.5% sulfur content fuel or the 0.05% low sulfur fuel to be sold in future, in the past year, the price difference in Singapore was only around 1%. We hope that such price levels can be maintained. Mr. Yik, a follow-up? Yes, I have a follow-up question, but I'll hand over the floor to Mr. Stephen Ho. Mr. Ho? It's like this. Mr. Yik and I are most concerned about the costs incurred on the industry. The power difference may be 0.1% or 1%, sorry. But just now I didn't hear them clear enough. For the same tank of fuel, say 100 liters, in the past a vessel can ply 100 kilometers. Minus 1%, 99 kilometers. But in reality, that may not be the case because more fuel may have to be consumed. So the second question for the government is, for so many years, the government gives the highest priority to environmental protection, which we agree. But what about the technical details? For the shipping industry, if the power difference warrants a change of the engine, say from 250 horsepower to 300 horsepower, and this Cap 171 is implemented, restricting the horsepower of our fishing vessels. For a 200 horsepower vessel, I cannot increase it to 300 horsepower. So upon the implementation of the regulation, the fishing capability or power of our vessels will be reduced, thus reducing the competitiveness of the industry. How are you going to remedy that? Will you conduct studies in future? All right, low sulfur, less fuel, higher environmental protection and higher power. That will be most welcome.
Thank you for the question. We have taken that up with the industry. First of all, the power output, maximum power output, that may be reduced by 1%. At the working group, professors have explained that the so-called maximum power output that will have the minimum impact on the industry, because it is very seldom for the industry to be using the maximum power output. The two professors from Hong Kong U and the Polytechnic University have explained that to the industry, which did not oppose to the explanation offered there and then. But I think Mr. Ho's question is not about the reduction of 1% in power output and the impact on the industry, but rather the research and development of technology that can help the industry. I think the development is not just about power output. Earlier on, with the help of Mr. Ho, we have had more communication with the industry. They are of the view that if there are engines which can reduce the use of fuel by, say, 10%, that would be very attractive to the industry. That kind of scientific development would be very attractive. What can the government do so that there could be such development of technology for the benefit of the industry? We explained to the industry that, in fact, we have a green transport pilot fund, which is now to be applied for by public transport companies. And I think there is hope for us to reduce emission, but still stabilizing power output. And we are talking about hybrid engines. The ferry operators and other operators have contacted us that they're interested in making use of the fund to test out the hybrid technology. If it should succeed, since the industry uses a lot of fuel, that will be very helpful to them. So we have promised. And in fact, we explained to the industry earlier that, in fact, there are suppliers of such engines, but the engine suppliers were not proactive in getting in touch with the industry. But then we had the Chinese New Year, and now we are going to step up our follow-up with the suppliers of the engines. If the industry can test these engines and if they find them satisfactory, then we can help roll out and publicize the technology, and then the industry will know whether it is cost effective to use the new technology. Can I please follow up? It's okay what you said. It's really very appealing. But can we do that in the short term? The regulation will kick in on the 1st of April. If the technology is going to succeed in 10 years' time, should I wait 10 years? So in the short and medium terms, what can you do to help the industry, including the marine industry, if there are problems that they should meet up with? What kind of responsibility can you take up? Chairman, before I talked about the new technology, I already explained that at the working group, we explained the maximum power output, which could be reduced by 1%. First of all, there were experts and professors from universities present at the meeting, and it is said that the so-called reduction in maximum power output will not have any impact on the industry, because it is very, very rare for the industry to use the maximum power output. And also there is a theoretical point made by the professors. Maybe I spend a little time here to explain that to you here. The professor said that now we are talking about a difference of 1%. But in terms of the research done, the 1% difference is too small. And so they emphasize that there is no actual difference. You can say that the maximum power output would stay very similar or would remain very much the same, because 1% is within the margin of error in terms of this particular research project. So the professor actually explained that to the working group. But just now, I didn't want to sound too academic, so I left that out. But in fact, the professor was of the view that the 1% difference or reduction in maximum power output would have no impact on the industry. I would actually look at the long term. If you are concerned about technological development for the industry, I think we should look more at the long term. That is why I concentrated on that just now. Mr. Yik. Mr. Mock. In the LegCo paper, CB bracket 4360, bracket 01, para 13, it says, some people in the industry were of the view that there was a 5% reduction in performance efficiency after the vessels used the LSD. That was according to the last test. There was the test of 2 engines. And of course, you can say that academically speaking, the margin of error should be permitted and there is no actual difference. But then, again, academically, our experience tells us that there is less heat energy emitted. This is a scientific fact. If you continue to use that kind of fuel, you have to be mindful about the output. So it is not just the 7-cent price differential and also power output reduction. And if you use a particular vessel type, say high-speed vessel, then it will be a big problem. But if you're talking about the Star Ferry, then of course it's not a big problem. So I would say it's still a problem. Even though this is an academic research and you are saying that there is no actual difference. However, in the paper here and also para 11, it sounds quite strange. It says that a member said that we should not consider subsidizing the operators because the increase in operating costs should be shouldered by the operators, and also by increasing the fares, the cost could be transferred to passengers. Now, this is easier said than done, but what about fishermen? Should they sell their catch at a higher price? That is another question. Just now, Deputy Director, you talk about hybrid engines. I understand that my company is going to apply to do a test. Have you received our application? I have not asked for the latest information from my colleagues, but when I asked the last time, they had not received it. So I like to say not all vessel types can use this. Say I work in the company, it has a big tank, so they can convert it. But maybe that is not possible for fishing vessels. So this is not a technology that can be used by all vessel types. Mr. Mock, can I respond, please? The last point first, and then I'd like to go back to the 5% issue. Because 5% sounds like it can be worrying. I agree. Now, 1% would say, you know, some fishermen also said that it might not be anything, but 5% is actually a big figure, and I like to explain that. Before I do so, I'd like to talk about the hybrid technology. I fully understand and appreciate the point made by Mr. Yik, and we know it. But at least if the industry can act like your company, Mr. Yik, do a pilot, test it out. And then if you find that it works, then people will try to see how that can fit into vessels. At least they can think in that direction. Yes, we don't need to wait over a decade. I think I have a similar view with Mr. Yik as to the 5% issue. Now, some of the trades had indicated that the use of LSD had reduced the performance efficiency of the vessels by 5%. In terms of daily operation, it is actually very difficult for us to know whether the performance efficiency or output has been reduced by 1%, 3%, or 5%. That is difficult. But how come we have this 5% here? I would say that the representatives at the working group read the report done by Hong Kong U, and there is this figure, 5% in the report. So I'd rather explain the test done by the Hong Kong U and why there was this figure of 5%. Actually, the Hong Kong U knew that to test maximum power output, especially making use of their methodology now and making use of heaters, etc., there is a big margin of error. So the Hong Kong U collected a few different sets of figures and got the average. So they could reduce the so-called noise. So one of the benchmarks was such that the maximum power output was reduced by 5%. But then strangely enough, 200 hours later, the maximum power output actually increased. So very often there is so-called noise. And therefore, they did 4 different tests and they got the average. And the average they got was 1.8%. Now, this is in the report. So he told the working group members that, in fact, we should go for the overall average and not the figure for each and every test. In fact, the industry did not object, but it only said that we should be given the range so we have a full understanding of the issue. That was what they said. Therefore, to us, the 5% is not that important. The importance should go to the average, which should be 1.8%. Yes, Mr. Lai, I'd like to add one thing. I hope members can, and the industry can look at this from a positive angle. As Mr. Ho and Mr. Yik said, you have concerns about the fuel consumption, and according to experts, there could be increased by 1%, and the experts have also said that this was a possible margin of error when they did the test or when they did the comparison. However, a clearer analysis has come from the test report itself. If we go for LSD oil, then to the engines and also the piston, there could be less corrosion. And also there could be a less frequent change of engine oil. And in fact, this can help lower the cost. I hope members of the industry can see the benefits of using LSD. I need to argue with you again. Well, if there is no follow-up, can I please interject here? Mr. Kenneth Chan could help us here. When you say 1% is the margin of error, however, if it happens all the time, then you should not call it a margin of error. It is a fact. Unless you say it fluctuates, then I can accept that it is a margin of error. But you seem to be saying that the maximum output or power output has been reduced by 1% quite frequently. So can you just say that this is an experiment or a survey, that there could be a margin of error of a certain percentage? And also, if the power output is always reduced by 1%, then how much will that translate into cost? Chairman, before the officials answer you, let me say this. These experimental errors, I can say that 1% is acceptable. It can happen. But I also agree with your viewpoint. Even if we operate local ferries, we are like OGVs. We would log all the trips and also trips in a shift and how much fuel is consumed. So I can know that for the trips taken, I know whether fuel has been consumed more or less. But of course, you can argue with me if there is a bigger wind and also there is a bigger passenger load. You have to look at all the correlation. I know this is complicated, but I'd like to alert you that in terms of operating costs, there will certainly be some impact, not by a big jump. That I agree. Well, but what about reduced maintenance costs? Can that offset the increased operating costs? Sorry, Chairman, I just like to argue with them because I don't agree. Now, of course, if you read the paper, you will know that there is a lower sulfur content, so the emissions will be less corrosive. So it is good for the engine itself. But then also, when the sulfur content is lower, there is less lubricating effect on the cylinders. This is my understanding. But I was aware of the entire test from beginning to end, and I could not find any problem with the cylinder liners. That is why we accept that the test this time around is successful. But as you know, I have tried different methods, and then the lubricating effect was reduced, so that within the cylinders there were scratches, and it would be a big problem because very expensive to convert or replace the cylinders.
Then how costly would that be? Well, tens of thousands of dollars, very costly. How much savings in terms of oil? For 200 horsepower, about $1 million per year on fuel. An increase of 1% will mean $100,000. $1 million, 1%, $100,000? No, $10,000, sorry. What's the difference in maintenance costs then? Well, they tell you that engine fuel cost can be saved, but to what extent? Madam Chairman, perhaps we can put it this way. As Mr. Yik and Mr. Ho are very familiar with this, together with the industry, we tested 2 engines. For all vessels, how representative those 2 engines are, I really cannot say that those 2 engines represent all vessels in Hong Kong. But I can say that from the test results, for the fuel consumed, from any standpoint, be it a reduction of 1% or you call it standard deviation, it will not be a major concern or disturbance to the industry. So apparently we can accept those test results as facts. In the long run, how much fuel can be saved? I think we have to wait till the new fuel is in use for quite some time and collect some data first. Why do we emphasize this pre-test? Because we have to tell the industry that technically to use higher quality fuel that is low sulfur diesel technically is feasible. At the beginning, they're more concerned about the amount of fuel used. They're afraid of more fuel being used. But apparently that worry is gone. Mr. Kenneth Chan? Well, Madam Chairman, I've no intention to argue with the university professors on those 2 tests on the 1% of standard deviation. Of course, that standard deviation is acceptable. But for the whole industry, why should we opt for this new fuel of LSD? In English, it's known as LSD, a very funny name. Will vessels become lighter, so to speak? Well, when taxis switched to natural gas, there were also problems. Well, the motivation was very correct. Still, accidents took place. There might be occurrences like the engines dying down for the taxis, etc., etc. So we have to study all possibilities. It's reasonable for colleagues to pose those worries. Anyway, my concern is about the drafting process of the regulation. In paragraph 7 of the regulation, exemption is proposed. You say that for some commercial activities, so long as they do not involve sale and distribution, they will not be covered by the regulation. In terms of definition, can you make it clear enough what commercial activities are and under what circumstances will sales and distribution be excluded? Take, for example, the imported fuel. When you considered this exemption, did you exhaust all possibilities? And then there's another issue relating to consumers. In the panel, we considered a possibility, that is, outside Hong Kong, if a certain type of fuel is cheaper, with a higher power and a higher lubricating effect, then all vessels may fill their tanks outside Hong Kong, disregarding our local laws. Then the industry may give priority consideration to prices. And then vessels all go elsewhere to fill their tanks. Now, in the drafting process, did you consider such possibilities? Say, in other jurisdictions, if their tax regime changes, even though we have discharged our duties, eventually we're still unable to improve our air quality. Mr. Lai, thank you, Madam Chairman. I'd like to thank Mr. Chan for his 2 questions. In Section 3 of the regulation, the exemption conditions are mentioned. The diesel supplier has to prove that for transshipment and exported fuel, they're deemed to be for local use unless proved otherwise. And the regulation is also stipulated if there's evidence that such fuel is for other uses, there must be clear documentary evidence to the effect that such fuel is for transshipment or export. Well, they cannot tell me at the scene that the fuel is for re-export or transshipment. They must be able to produce bills and documents to prove the uses. As for supply, as we said in our introduction, in this exercise, by way of the supply of light sulfur diesel, we would like to improve our air quality. Of course, if a vessel fills its tank outside Hong Kong, then it will not be controlled by us in terms of the type of oil used. For the mainland, which is more of our concern, for river trade vessels from PRD or from Guangzhou, what fuel are they using? On the mainland, they're using 0.03% sulfur content diesel, a bit better than our present standard. So we don't need to worry about the fuel quality of the mainland. But on the mainland, reality may be different from what's stipulated in the law. Well, we have to look at the requirements of our country. Oh, a very good answer. What you meant was that they had to put forth actual proof. That is, they're using fuel of a higher quality than what we require. That is low sulfur diesel. So if they're not to be regulated by our regulation, then they have to provide documentary evidence. Yes, the oil supplier has to produce documentary evidence that the fuel is not for local consumption. That is, the goods are for re-export or transshipment. And also fuel for the army, the troops will also be exempted, as has been our practice. Well, if our country's requirement is 0.03%, even better than ours, then we need not worry if that is a fact. However, for those of us who have frequent opportunities of going to the mainland to fill their tanks, we understand that the law is a bit different from reality. Well, Madam Chairman, that will be a problem that we cannot handle under this regulation. I think we are all concerned about the result of this regulation. The impact on the consumers, the impact on the oil companies, vessels, etc. Those are our concerns. As for matters to the north of Shenzhen River, those are acts of the state, which is beyond our control. Well, there are reasons for implementing this regulation. Any follow-up from other members? I'd like to ask about the content of the regulation. Is it appropriate for me to do so? Well, members, I'd like to seek your advice. If for the overall direction of the regulation, members have no further questions, then we can actually proceed to clause-by-clause scrutiny. As for overall policy, I actually have another question, but I'll let you ask your questions first. I'd like to ask about shore power, though it is not related to this regulation. But we have to adopt a comprehensive attitude on this. Now, OGVs will have to switch their fuel when they berth. In future, the standard is 0.5%. Now is 3.5%. What about the supply of shore power? What's the latest progress? Madam Chairman, shore power is something new. Internationally, for the supply of shore power, last year, in the middle of last year, we got international standards for the hardware. As for the software, various jurisdictions are still working out a common international standard. We're still gauging the evolution of this exercise. When we have international standards, then in Hong Kong, if we establish shore power facilities, those international standards will be applicable. And now the EMSD is conducting a study on the international development of shore power and what's the latest international positioning of the matter. If we've got international standards for hardware and software, then the Kai Tak cruise terminal will be the first test point for the supply of shore power. But members have to understand that shore power is something new internationally. Even if we are to supply shore power in Kai Tak cruise terminal, for the piece of legislation being drafted at the moment on fuel switch, we of course require OGVs to switch to low sulfur diesel of 0.5% sulfur content when they berth. But then we cannot force each and every vessel to use shore power. For cruises carrying passengers, they use shore power more. But for container vessels, they're very big. Internationally, very few of them use shore power. Anyway, shore power can be an option of clean fuel, but we cannot legislate to mandatorily require all OGVs to use shore power, unless throughout the whole world, facilities for supplying shore power are in place. Members, any follow-up questions? Well, just now I was talking to Mr. Frankie Yik. There's still a worry. That's about technical studies. We were told just now that it wouldn't take over a decade. Well, but still, it will take quite some time, maybe not over a decade. Now, we're in an experimental stage, which may last 6 months or 9 months. After that, the shipping industry may be able to use the fuel. But if you're talking about fishing vessels, you may still have to carry out further studies. It's just like the cell phones or analog mobile phones in the past, which were so big. Now we have the small smartphones. Well, people working on fishing vessels must have knowledge about shore power first. Even if you know a particular device or machine, that doesn't mean that you know all knowledge about shore power. So anything the government can do by way of training? Mr. Mok, I'd like to thank Mr. Ho for his question. when we discuss the elimination of diesel vehicles, we already mentioned this. That is when we have new models, what the government can do to assist the industry. Well, you have to bear in mind that vessels are at sea. Oh, yes, we understand that. In future, together with the VTC, we'll try to see whether any training programs can be organized by them.
The masters who are doing this may have to learn about maintaining electrical appliances. They might be using the battery, all right, for the generator, but then they will also have to deal with electrical appliances. So there will be new technology to be learned, and just like the new generation of diesel vehicles, we like to allow the masters to understand the new technology. We'll do so together with the VTC. Okay, if there are no other questions, let us go into clause-by-clause examination of the regulation. Mr. Lai or Mr. Mok, who will take us through the regulation itself, please. Let me propose that we use the Chinese version as the basis. If members think we need to look at the English version, then we can certainly do so. Is that acceptable to members? Or maybe we can look at both at the same time. At the same time? Okay, fine. Thank you, Chairman. Number 1. This is the Air Pollution Control Marine Light Diesel Regulation made by the Secretary for the Environment under Section 43 of the Air Pollution Control Ordinance Cap 311 after consultation with the Advisory Council on the Environment. This is what is said in the English as well as Chinese versions of the regulation. I believe members may not have any questions on this. Let me carry on with the first clause, commencement. The regulation will come into operation on the 1st of April 2014.
April 2014. 唔知大家有冇啲乜嘢問題？
Any questions, please? No questions. I will go to Clause 2, interpretation. In the Chinese version, in this regulation, classification in relation to marine diesel, light diesel means classification A according to 1. the ISO specifications, or 2. the Platts specifications, or B as motor vehicle diesel. With relation to ISO specifications and the Platts specifications, these are told us by oil companies that in terms of the light diesel oil they are supplying, these are the two most often used specifications, and they tell us to include both. B is motor vehicle diesel because motor vehicle diesel is a cleaner diesel. As Mr. Lai said in his introduction, some pleasure boats make use of dutiable commodities, and they are using motor vehicle diesel. That is why we need to include motor vehicle diesel under classification so we can have a comprehensive coverage. The English classification.
Marine light diesel means classification A according to the first number 1 the ISO specification, or 2 the Platts specification, or B as motor vehicle diesel.
Right, 大家有冇問題? Any questions? I don't understand. Why do you include motor vehicle diesel? But you explained it. Still, I find it strange. The legal advisor, please speak up if and when you have a view. Mr. Mok, please continue. Document. I will be explaining this word document in the ensuing clauses, and it includes a book, voucher, receipt, or data material, or information that is recorded in a non-legible form but is capable of being reproduced in a legible form. This will help us in tracing the source of the oil and the transaction chain, and I can further explain this when we come to the clauses in English.
Or data, material, or information that's recorded in a non-legible form but is capable of being produced in a legible form.
Members, questions? If not, please continue. Next, transaction includes any dealing whether with or without consideration. In English, transaction is interpreted as
交易 includes any dealing whether with or without consideration. 咁其實解
the same definition in English and Chinese. If there are no questions, can I please continue to batch? In relation to marine light diesel means a quantity that is homogeneous with regard to the parameters set out in A, the ISO specifications, B, the PLAS specifications, or C, the motor vehicle diesel specifications. In English,
in relation to marine light diesel means a quantity that is homogeneous with regard to the parameters set out in A, the ISO specification, B, the PLAS specification, or C, the motor vehicle diesel specifications.
Questions, please? If not, please continue. Thank you. Next, motor vehicle diesel means any light diesel oil which complies with the motor vehicle diesel specifications. In English,
motor vehicle diesel specification means the specification set out in Schedule 1 of the Air Pollution Control Motor Vehicle Fuels Regulation. 咁就汽車柴油規格，每次最我正話講過咧，就係汽車柴油規格 （Motor Vehicle Diesel Specification） 指空氣污染管制汽車燃料規例第311章附屬法例 L 附表1所列嘅規格。咁正話英文嗰度咧，我讀咗㗎啦。
係兩個連埋㗎啦，喺英文嗰度。
係啊。跟住就係供應啦。供應咧就係包括要約供。
Next one, supply. Includes A, offer or expose for supply, B, sale, and C, offer or expose for sale.
A,
in English,
expose for supply, B, sale, and C, offer or expose for sale.
抱歉咧，應該係讀邀約嘅。
You read one Chinese character wrongly. Mr. Ho, yes? A question? Talking about supply, sometimes fishermen plying in the northeastern waters may not be able to access an oil supply depot easily, and sometimes we have these cylinders with oil, and can we offer one such bucket of oil to another vessel in times of need? Maybe he can give me $400 for that bucket of oil. Sometimes you are, giving away the oil at a lower price than normally charged by the market. And this happens. What are you going to do? Well, it's really in an emergency, But sometimes it doesn't work if you ask me to do it twice a week. Here, if that bucket of oil, now we are talking about oil that complies with the definitions in the law. When the regulation comes into effect, I would expect that you are still offering oil that complies with the legal standards. You are not offering oil that is below the statutory standard. Well, this is where the problem lies. I'm talking about the northeastern waters. Sometimes the oil is not purchased in Hong Kong, but on the mainland. And without knowing it, we have purchased the oil, and it is on our vessels, and we usually do not keep the invoices. And if we get caught what will happen. Now, of course, we might think and we might want to think that the oil is up to standard. But what if it doesn't? Well, if it is really in an emergency and it happens within Hong Kong waters, I would advise the fishermen that if the oil has been purchased elsewhere and if the oil is not up to Hong Kong standards, when you buy oil, I'm sure you can ask, and more or less you know whether it complies with Hong Kong standards. Now, of course, you won't buy oil if there is a lot of water mixed into it. To comply with the regulation, if you offer other people oil, whether or not for consideration, now here it says even without consideration, this will be included. And if really it is in an emergency and you ask us for a special consideration not to implement the regulation, then the regulation will not be of any use, because whenever anybody is caught, they would say it is an emergency. So I would advise you that in that circumstance, do not do that. Well, that is why I am asking the government to apply the regulation stringently. Well, I don't know, things can happen, and I hope you will really publicize this. Well, you belong to a political party, and I think you're in a difficult position to say that, but my party would allow me to say that. Well, it is really about publicity. We'll try to do a good job with the fishermen. Chairman, while we are on this point, can I extend it a little? The regulation regulates supply, not purchase, right? The individual fishermen should not worry too much, because the owner will purchase the oil, but we are not talking about the owner as the supplier. We are not regulating the users. So fishermen do not have to over-worry, I think. Is his understanding correct? Mr. Mok, I hope you do not nod so easily, because what you are nodding about now is not the same as what you said. Now, I don't know whether I have misunderstood Dr. Low. Under the law now, supply, of course, is regulated by the law. When you purchase oil, we do not regulate the purchaser. But what I'm talking about is, as Mr. Ho said, it is an emergency situation, and you offer people oil. That is a dangerous act, because according to the law, supply is included, whether it is with or without consideration. This will be included, in other words. So even if it is an emergency and you offer people oil, that act is regulated. And I was saying that we would have to tell fishermen clearly in the future. So you have to do the publicity, the government. I agree. If it is a local vessel operating in Hong Kong waters, then they should have purchased law or oil that is in compliance with the law, because they are operating locally anyway. And normally speaking, the oil that they have on the vessel should comply with the legal standards. Mr. Mok, perhaps you can look at the importers and the suppliers later on. We will look at those definitions in a moment. And you will see these words carries on a business of supply of marine light diesel, and you would be seeing those interpretations in a moment. When you have a vessel and you have oil on the vessel, and your friend is going to be stranded very soon because of a lack of fuel, and you offer them some oil, whether or not for consideration, then would this person be regarded as an importer or supplier? Maybe not. Mr. Lai, we will come to these terms in a moment, Mr. Chairman. There are two kinds of businessmen: marine light diesel importer And in an emergency and when fishermen help people out, they should not fall into this category. But what about marine light diesel supplier? That has a wider definition. And for these suppliers, there are two requirements.
Now they have to buy oil that is up to our specifications. In Hong Kong, for normal oil companies, if you purchase a few buckets from them, you should be very confident. But then there are challenging scenarios. According to this regulation, the supplier has to keep the supply documents. The user may not do that. So under statutory requirements, such documents are necessary. Otherwise, for the person who supplies oil, we don't know whether he's a professional supplier or an ordinary user. If there are no documents, there will be enforcement difficulties. Therefore, in future, in terms of publicity and education, we'll have to make this point clear. Mr. Frankie Yik. Mr. Lai, I think tracing is most important. All right, I'm at sea, I have no oil. I ask Mr. Ho whether I can have a bucket of oil from him. Then I can ask him whether his oil is up to standard. He say yes. Well, coincidentally, you come to inspect my vessel. Now, if you discover the oil to be substandard, I say I buy it from Mr. Mack, say, for example, and this is the document. So the most important thing is tracing, such that you can trace whether or not the bucket of oil is lawful. Now, there are two tiers of requirements. Now, if a person holds a bucket of oil and gives it to another person, irrespective of whether there's consideration, because here consideration is mentioned in the regulation. Now, this act falls within the definition of supply. Yes, precisely. Now, the second tier of requirement is that in terms of business, if you are buying and selling oil, you have to keep records. For the first tier of requirement, when you provide oil to somebody else, you fall within the definition for supply. When you give oil to others, you have to make sure that your oil is lawful. However, you may not need to keep records because you're not in business. You're just engaging in emergency help among peers. So if I want to trace this transaction, you can at least tell me from whom you obtained the oil. That is, I can trace the supply chain. Well, Madam Chairman, we'll have to look into this when we come to Section 4G1. The definition of supply is very broad. Any person supplies or arranges to apply marine light diesel that is not lawful will commit an offense. So you have to make sure your drafting can allay that worry. You have to make sure that your definition is precise enough. Otherwise, you cannot argue, because previously the definition is very broad. Even though you do not accept any consideration, you are supplying oil. So when we come to that, we have to be very careful. And then under Section 7, Mr. Lai, even suppliers have to keep records. If you're talking about emergency help among peers, you suddenly become a supplier, then where can you obtain the documents? I understand the rationale behind this provision. That is, you would like to regulate the floating market. It's just like in Thailand, all the hawkers are selling commodities on the river. So at sea or on a river, vessels may be selling oil. Under such individual circumstances. So I think you have to tell us very clearly the target of regulation. What persons would you like to regulate? You mean the major importers and suppliers in the industry? Or do you want to regulate these so-called emergency help among peers? Such cases do you want to regulate? Madam Chairman, allow me to offer some explanation here, and if necessary, we can go back and offer more detailed explanation. If you use the Chinese version, when we mention 船油供應商, marine light diesel supplier, our focus is the supplier now. Will that person become a supplier? Now, here it says, it means a person who carries on a business of supplying marine light diesel, but is not a marine light diesel importer. So the definition is very clear. This supplier is in the business of supplying oil. So cases of emergency help among peers will not be covered. Now, what is the meaning of including this definition? Later in the regulation, it will be clearer. The main purpose is that records have to be kept for tracing. That's it. So for cases of emergency help among peers, no records need to be produced because they won't be covered under this definition because they are not in the business of supplying oil. But then when supplying the oil, that person has to meet the statutory requirements as well. For Section 4, we need it so that people won't use emergency help among peers as excuses. Well, when we come to that section, we can give you more details. All right, we move on to 船隻 vessel. Yes, 船隻 vessel. Vessel has the meaning given by Section 2 of the Merchant Shipping Local Vessels Ordinance, Cap 548. Well, this is very simple. No problem. Yes, this is very simple. The English is also very simple. 船隻嘅商船本地船隻條例第2條給予該詞的涵義。Next, 普氏規格 Platts specification. The specification set out in the table entitled FOB Singapore Gas Oil Diesel Specifications in the December 2013 edition of the document Methodology and Specifications Guide, Asia Pacific and Middle East Refined Oil Products, published by Platts, a division of McGraw-Hill Financial, New York, USA.
On the table entitled FOB Singapore Gas Oil Diesel Specification in the December 2013 edition of the document Methodology and Specification Guide, Asia Pacific and Middle East Refined Oil Products, published by Platts, a division of McGraw-Hill Financial, New York, USA.
係，大家有冇問題？我想問呢，即係呢個。
Any questions? I'd like to ask about the word specifications, because you have a date here. If somebody updates the definition, we'll still follow the December 2013 edition. If there's any updating, we'll have to come to LegCo to update our own laws. Well, when other jurisdictions update their edition, will you put in something in the regulation to peg us to the future updating? Or you want to confine us to the December 2013 edition for the time being? For the sake of fairness and openness and clearance on the part of the industry, to put it clearly, December 2013 edition is good so that we know that our requirements are in that edition. In future, if other jurisdictions change their laws, then we'll have to come to LegCo for updating. We did discuss with the oil companies this issue, and we all agreed to make it clear here. Mr. Yik, Madam Chairman, your question is a good one. You know, international standards are very often quicker than Hong Kong. Well, in this case, it may not be the case because it's in Singapore. Anyway, if other jurisdictions are quicker than Hong Kong, and you say Hong Kong is to follow others, so if our laws cannot catch up, what should happen? Yes, if other jurisdictions amend their laws, it won't work because we'll keep to the December 2013 edition. Madam Chairman, we understand that issue. If other people have an amendment, we can also opt for an amendment. There can be two ways out. We can follow the document without necessarily following the addition. The question is whether LegCo will accept such an approach. The other option is actually my personal view. Normally, such changes are to make requirements more stringent. So new requirements will definitely suit old ones. So I won't have any problems. I'll have time to handle the new requirements. It's just like Euro 4 and Euro 5. If our laws are using the Euro 4 standards, if somebody adopts the Euro 5 standards, or if somebody gives me a vehicle of Euro 6, then definitely Euro 6 will satisfy Euro 5 or Euro 4 requirements. Internationally, they are more inclined to more stringent requirements. So to put it in simple terms, products of higher quality will definitely suit our standards at a lower level. Well, everybody may be using quality fuel. I cannot say, oh, I will bar the quality fuel because we're still in the old regulatory regime. That won't happen. All right, next, 國境貨品 goods in transit means marine light diesel that is brought into Hong Kong solely for the purpose of taking it out of Hong Kong, and that remains at all times on the vessel, vehicle, or aircraft that brought it into Hong Kong.
Marine light diesel that is brought into Hong Kong solely for the purpose of taking it out of Hong Kong, and that remains at all times on the vessel, vehicle, or aircraft that brought it into Hong Kong. 咁意思都係一樣嘅。
大家有冇？
So the meaning is the same. Any questions? So what about 輕質柴油 light diesel oil? Yes, it has the same meaning as in Section 69 of the Dutiable Commodities Ordinance, Cap 109. I don't think there'll be any problems. Next, 轉運貨品 transshipment goods means any important marine light diesel that A is consigned on a through bill of lading or through airway bill from a place outside Hong Kong to another place outside Hong Kong. And B is or is to be removed from the vessel, vehicle, or aircraft in which it was imported and before being exported is either returned to the same vessel, vehicle, or aircraft, or transferred to another vessel, vehicle, or aircraft, whether it is or is to be transferred directly between such vessels, vehicles, or aircrafts, or whether it is to be landed in Hong Kong after its importation and stored pending exportation. So the whole meaning is that it just passes Hong Kong and will leave. In English, well, sorry, I think this is a standard provision. I believe the business sector and members are all familiar with this provision. I'll skip the English version then. It's something very standard. It's just like ISO. So let's go to ISO. ISO specification means the specification set out in Table 1 of the document ISO 8217-2012, Petroleum Products, Fuels Class F, Specifications of Marine Fuels, published by the International Organization for Standardization. In English, it's also very standard.
7012 Petroleum Product Fuel, Class F Specification of Marine Fuels, published by the International Organization for Standardization. 咁我諗呢個大家都可能
係盧偉國議員。
Dr. Lo Wai Kwok. Well, ISO standards may be updated. We may be talking about the 2012 edition. By 2015, they may have another edition. Do you have any method to write this provision such that if the updating does not quite affect our own laws, we don't need to amend our laws? Otherwise, in 2015, you may have to come to us and tell us you want to change 2012 to 2015 edition. It's just like the international standards that we just discussed. When other jurisdictions have new editions, what should we do? Chairman, there are two approaches. We just say ISO 8217-2012. But of course, if ISO 8217-2012 is tightened, we may need to consult the LegCo before changing our own laws. We cannot just automatically change our laws.
But in fact, the ISO has to take a process before there is any change. There is a drafting process, for example. We will be looking at this and they will tell us that they are drafting it and it is expected to launch such and such by a certain time. So we can propose a legislative amendment in order to also amend the standards. I think that can be done. Well, it doesn't matter. You should be prepared to do this because there could be a new version where there can be a concrete impact on the regulation. And I just like to have some flexibility. If this is going to be done, then we have to be prepared for it. Yes, I think the understanding is such that we expect the international standards to be enhanced instead of being relaxed. So the version is written in here. But indeed, if there are exceptions, you have to come back to us quickly enough. Okay, next. In the Chinese version now, I have some questions here about this part. I'm fine with all the translation issues, but in the Chinese version, I can see this part, but it's not in the English version. When the law is published, will it be in this form? In other words, if there are international organizations or specifications, those would be included in the Chinese version to tell what the Chinese translations are, and the same will be absent from the English version. Is that right, Mr. C? The way to do it is to take care of readers of Chinese only. In the past, some international organizations would only have their English name as the formal nomenclature. And in the Chinese version, sometimes only the English version is given in previous drafting exercises. But now we like to take care of Chinese readers of our laws, and we now have Chinese translations of all these organizations or specifications, but these are not the official translations. And therefore, in the Chinese version, we have to tell readers that this is only a translation of the original name of the organization, etc. And the information is only required in the Chinese version, because in the English version there is no mention of a Chinese translation. So in order to have the same part in the English to say that this Chinese is actually so-and-so in English, then it will not be necessary. Well, I'd like to just confirm with you, is it a new way of drafting legislation and you're going to do it from now on? Say, for example, number 1, McGraw-Hill Financial, you translate it to say McGraw-Hill. Are you doing it according to the Cantonese or Putonghua pronunciation? Usually, we will rely on the bureaus, the relevant policy bureaus, to make the proposal, and that is how the translation is done for that particular policy. My understanding is that the EPD has liaised with these organizations here to get the translated name. Would then the Chinese names be acceptable to the industry, or are they translated by the bureaus according to the English pronunciation? Mr. Lee, the relevant organizations have been contacted, say McGraw-Hill. They have issued a standard, and we have asked them how the Chinese translation should be done. They are the authors of the standard, so we asked them for a Chinese And if you ask the industry, there could be some jargons, or netizens may have some inventions. But I think it is most proper if we go back to the organizations themselves. Well, that is a very proper way. I'm just worried that different bureaus may use different ways to come up with the translations, and the situation will be really chaotic then. Clause 3, application. 1. This regulation does not apply in relation to any marine light diesel vessel, diesel that is A, goods in transit, B, transshipment goods, or C, solely for export or re-export. 2. In a prosecution for an offense under this regulation, any marine light diesel that is found in Hong Kong is presumed, in the absence of evidence to the contrary, to be marine light diesel that is not A, goods in transit, B, transshipment goods, or C, solely for export or re-export. In English,
this regulation does not apply in relation to any marine light diesel that is A, goods in transit, B, transshipment goods, or C, solely for export or re-export. Number 2, in a prosecution for an offense under this regulation, any marine light diesel that is found in Hong Kong is presumed, in the absence of evidence to the contrary, to be marine light diesel that is not A, goods in transit, B, transshipment goods, or C, solely for export or re-export.
Right. Members, Dr. Low, in 1, why don't you simplify it to say that this regulation does not apply to the following types of marine light diesel? Because if you do it according to my proposal, it will align with the English version, and the Chinese will read better, because now it sounds like weird. Yeah, I always think that is not very Chinese when they do it in Chinese. Why don't you just say this regulation does not apply to any marine light diesel that is, in a way that is more aligned with the English construction. Thank you for the question. Indeed, this has a lot to do with drafting, and this is a usual problem. We have to distinguish between this regulation applied to something or this regulation does not apply in relation to something. And in Chinese, we have to do the same. That this regulation does not apply in relation to has to be translated. I mean, the words in relation to have to be rendered in Chinese. The difference is that when we say does not apply to, what comes after is the direct object. But when it says does not apply in relation to, that what follows is not a direct object. Here we say does not apply in relation to because you can see that the main object of this regulation is in clause 4, supply of non-compliant marine light diesel. And the targets are the people, the persons who do the supply. And this regulation does not apply to the oil itself. And these are these fine distinctions to be taken care of, and that is why the different diction. Well, Chairman, well, yes, there may be these fine distinctions in law, but still the Chinese construction should not be so weird. It is very difficult to understand it. I know, it's very difficult. The Chinese that we are familiar with may not apply very well to the fine distinctions of responsibility or obligations. And I appreciate what Mr. Peter C. said. We have to target the people, not the oil, and we have to relate the people to the oil in this particular clause. I know it's extremely difficult. Mr. Mock, just carry on. Thank you, Chairman. Clause 4. Supply of non-compliant marine light diesel prohibited. 1. A person commits an offense if the person supplies or causes to be supplied any marine light diesel that does not comply with Schedule 1. 2. Subsection 1 does not apply when the marine light diesel is applied to a warship or any other vessel on military service. 3. A person who commits an offence under subsection 1 is liable on conviction to a fine at level 5 and to imprisonment for 3 months.
Marine light diesel prohibit. One, a person commits an offence if the person supplies or causes to be supplied any marine light diesel that does not comply with Schedule 1. Subsection 1 does not apply if the marine light diesel is supplied to a warship or any other vessel on military service. 3, a person commits an offence under subsection 1 is liable on conviction to a fine at level 5 and to imprisonment for 3 months.
Any questions? Yes, Mr. Kenneth Chan. Chairman, when we discussed the policy, I was very concerned about the exemptions. You explained that apart from goods in transit, etc., and warships and other vessels on military service, well, this was not exactly made clear under interpretations. I'd like you to now explain when you say a warship or any other vessel on military service. Do you have any operable definitions? So we understand the scope of exemption and how this will actually come to pass. When you say warship, does it mean warships from everywhere in the world according to international laws? How are that defined? And also, can you do this for the record? And other vessel on military service. What does it mean? What is the rationale for having this construction? Can I also add to it? Does it mean warship and any other vessel and military service apply only to the PLA garrison? Well, I don't think so, but I'd like to understand from the Bureau. Is it that warships, if they are engaged by certain warships as feeder, from time to time British and US warships call our ports? Mr. Mock, thank you. Well, if they are just tugboats, they may not belong to this scope. The tugboats are only doing service for the warships. Actually, the construction here follows the EU Directive 2005/33/EC. It also uses the construction warship or any other vessel on military service. When we enforce the regulation, we of course know that when a warship comes to Hong Kong, there may be people sending water or other supplies to the warship. Now, those vessels will not be included in this scope. We are only talking about military vessels. Only those would be included in the definition other vessel on military service. Apart from this EU directive, still, I think you have not explained the question. You say this is what is written by the EU and you just transport it here. But you may not understand the meaning of that EU directive. There could be some specifications or operational details. There are 28 countries in the EU. This may be a general description of the issue. But then what about the operational details? Maybe you have not done your research thoroughly. However, this has been transported into our regulation. So my question is, when we have to enforce this regulation, how is the execution done? What is meant by a warship? What is meant by any other vessel on military service? Say if the PLA says, this is a warship, and we can put a sticker on the body of the ship to say this is an act of the state, would that be the case? Chairman, we can certainly try to find more information. And the warship, for example, definition in EU and also the definition on any other vessel on military service according to the EU, there may be definitions or interpretations. But my immediate response is warships are warships as we understand them. But of course, actually, we need to dig in more deeply to know the details and how the term should be interpreted. We can go back and take a look. And also, you have to see whether the same expression has been included in other pieces of legislation and how this is applied in Hong Kong. I think this will also facilitate the work of your frontline officers. Dr. Low. Chairman, I have already said that under 4.1, the scope is extremely wide as it is written, whether it is the Chinese or English versions. A person who supplies or causes to be supplied any MLD that does not comply with Schedule 1 commits an offense. Indeed, this will not allay the worry of Mr. Ho when he said, oil could be supplied by one vessel to another in an emergency. I don't know whether you can improve the drafting to tighten the scope, so you only target the prospective criminals instead of including such emergencies as well.
It's time for us to conclude our meeting. In the discussion just now, questions were raised, and some had not yet been answered by the administration. So I'd like the administration to prepare a paper for us, for example, on the status of vessels and also scenarios such as emergency help among peers and so forth. So can we have a paper from the administration including the act of lending a bucket of oil to a peer? Is that lawful? So we'll have our next meeting on the 18th of February at 10:45 a.m. Dr. Lo Wai Kwok cannot attend, but we'll get him informed. Thank you.